Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. We have such a stellar group of panelists with us. So let me offer a few words of kind of orientation and then move on. My name is Paula Nurayas. I'm a professor at the University of Washington School of Social Work, and I'm going to be co-moderating this with my terrific colleague, Dorian Traube, who's from the University of Southern California. I just wanted to mention that express appreciation on a number of fronts. One is from the American Academy of Social Work and Social Welfare, has some early career faculty who participated as mentees in a program, and they provided some thoughts for some of the questions that we've prepared. And I also want to acknowledge the Research Capacity Development Committee of SWR, the planning subcommittee, which includes Camille Quinn, Jennifer Bellamy, Arti Maleku, who is also providing us terrific tech support today, and Linda Sprague Martinez for, again, sort of participating both in the planning of the event and the questions. I just do want to note that we have some prepared questions that we will begin with. However, we've found in the past that we'll need to be shifting along the way to some of the questions in the chat box. So if you have questions or reactions, do use the chat box, please. And please keep your microphones muted just to reduce background noise. And just be aware that this webinar is being recorded. And as I mentioned, we're so appreciative to have a truly stellar group of panelists, social work leaders, to share their perspectives on this very timely topic about promotion, tenure, and just ongoing processes of making those considerations in the context of COVID-19 and state violence. As moderators, Dorian and I want to acknowledge that there are variation in context of both COVID-19 and state violence. Our focus will be on ways that candidates can navigate their pathway to promotion and tenure, given these variations and discrepancies, alongside some more universal factors that are influencing us all. We also deem it appropriate to acknowledge that we are barely 1 year since George Floyd's murder, and this travesty and so many other forms of current injustices, violence stemming from police behaviors, xenophobia, oppression from political sources, and more. These are by no means new, but they are powerful elements of a challenging context that we are addressing and moving forward in today. And finally, I would like to acknowledge that we are collectively all gathering from a range of locations. I'd just like to note that I am sitting in Seattle, and this acknowledge that at the University of Washington, we learn, teach, and live on and near the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish people, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. Now, at this point, I'm going to just turn to the panelists to actually provide some introduction of themselves, their name, affiliation, rank and role, but also 2 minutes each to provide us some understanding of the relevant lenses or framing that they will bring to their discussion. And with this, let me first turn to you, Henrika McCoy. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me and including me in this really important conversation. My name is Henrika McCoy, and I'm an associate professor and interim associate dean for academic affairs and student services at Jane Addams College of Social Work, University of Illinois, Chicago. And I come to this conversation really having, as most of us, remotely working for the last year, but I actually have been doing it longer. I began a sabbatical last year in January and had a sabbatical that was interrupted, to say the least, from everything that was happening in the world, of course, COVID, but as well as being surrounded and reminded on our TVs of the state violence that we know has really been the haunting of Black people in this country since its creation. And so it was particularly impactful for me because my research has traditionally been in the area of young Black boys who are in the juvenile legal system, who have experienced and have mental health issues, But more recently, I've worked at looking at the violent victimization experiences of young Black men 18 to 24 and kind of the overlap in those areas. And so for me, it was a particularly devastating experience because I was at home to work on moving forward some research that I had gotten funded by NIJ over a period of time. And it was supposed to be my opportunity to begin to share some of that work and be able to elevate the voices of the young men that have participated in our study. And first COVID hit. And so I was pulled away from my sabbatical to engage in helping our university make plans for the fall. But then, of course, on top of that, we saw George Floyd be murdered, as well as then repeated violence of other videos that came to light. And so I found myself really struggling with moving forward my own research, which was really focused in that area, and trying to balance in my own kind of emotional and psychological health in terms of not wanting to watch the TV, not being able to avoid the TV, not being able to avoid conversations, thinking about how the narrative shared by the young men in my own work, how those might have been really reflected in what I was seeing on TV. And then also, of course, experiencing and watching the disproportionate impact of COVID on African Americans in this country. And so I came to really this conversation with having then moved forward with writing a couple of op-eds about the impact of COVID, the impact of state violence and racial terror on African Americans, and then also on me as a faculty member, and how I felt that might impact my interest in moving forward. I'm an associate professor. I, like most people, have a goal of becoming a full professor, and really saw my sabbatical as a chance to begin to make inroads in that way, and realizing that might not happen the way that I intended, because the work that I was funded to do that would be expected for me to move forward might not happen in the same way. So I think I come to this conversation with that perspective on the challenge of being mid-career and wondering how I am going to be able to move forward and protect my own emotional and psychological health, while I then also elevate the voices of those that I think are really important and are underserved and not heard very often in our country. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Henrika. Tamara, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Tamara Cadet, and I am currently an associate professor at the Simmons University School of Social Work in Boston, although I am in Chicago for the weekend, moving my youngest daughter into her apartment as she begins her journey in marketing, very different from what I do. And I guess I'll talk about it from a couple of, I think about this from a couple of lenses and the frames that I've been thinking about. I can echo everything Henrika said, Dr. McCoy said. It's been hard. I think it will continue to be hard. And yet onward, we have to figure out a way to go. I have been thinking, well, this COVID pandemic is new. I say that in quotes. The racial injustice and the racism pandemic is not new. And so in some ways, this is not a new discussion. That it's a discussion that we've had, and yet we can't figure out how to do it. And what feels different is that it's more public because we have social media. And so I have been I've become pretty good at compartmentalizing. I decided not to watch television for a very long time. I have young adults in my life that bring a variety of emotions, from my goddaughters to my daughters, to my daughter's fiance, and sort of his view, to my brothers, to sort of family members. And so I think about all of this sort of, how do we navigate in tough times? And for some of us, their times are always tough. And so how do we sort of do that? I also come at it from this, I'm at a primarily teaching university. I have a fairly robust research agenda. And this balance of sort of doing your research, wanting to do research that's meaningful, but knowing that you've got to do teaching and service at the same time. I think that I had to pivot, just like others, around my research. My research happens to be with older adults that are at risk for low health literacy. And so what was I going to do when I can't go? I'm a clinical social worker by training, so I'm supposed to see them and talk with them and do all my qualitative interviewing with them. And what do I do? And I did shift to doing some of this work on the phone. And when it opened up, the doors that opened up for me, as opposed to doing it locally in Boston, I got to do it sort of nationally. And I spent a lot of time interviewing folks in Michigan, in Detroit. And in addition to getting the information that I needed, how some of these folks that are 75 and older were viewing the political message, sort of the political storm, the George Floyd storm. It was just this whole other set of interviews that happened. So that's just a little bit, happy to share more, but want to stay within my 2 minutes.
Thank you. Judith.
I'm going to try to be brief so that we can get into some good discussion. I'm Judith Gagne. I'm a professor and the Associate Dean of Faculty Affairs at Boston University. I also am a senior fellow at the Institute for Health Systems Innovation and Policy. And I guess I'm stating this first time publicly, I agreed to chair the University Appointment Tenure Promotion Committee at BU next year. So I bring those perspectives to this. I often think about what we've been going through in the past year is a national and global experience, a collective trauma, but very much recognize that while we have common experiences, it's quite diverse depending on our physical or geographic location, as well as the social spaces or identities that we occupy and our own personal histories. And if anything, this year has just reinforced to me in my roles as Associate Dean of Faculty Affairs, humility in making and not making assumptions of the complexities of so many faculty and students and staff's lives, and the importance of that. I think about the title for this webinar, and I think about it's not COVID and state violence, but it really this year has been the intersection of those two phenomenon. You know, COVID and the experiences of Black men and women in the criminal justice system by the police force, they have both laid bare the structural inequalities and structural racism in our country. I also think about state violence or state power when we look both at both instances. If anything, many of us have struggled through the year that our experiences through COVID have been often shaped or misshaped by federal or state or local policies, and the power of those, along with the power of the state in terms of criminal justice policy, educational housing policy. So I don't see these as two separate phenomena, but two that have come together in a very powerful way in our country. What I would focus on today, or what I try to think, what could I contribute to our dialogue today? And what I really like to think about is how we be strategic, whether as individual faculty or as schools. And I would stress two things. Context matters. We need to understand our local context and how to leverage it. BU, for example, Research One University, heavy focus on research, large, we've got 16 or 17 colleges and schools, private, different opportunities than state schools in some ways, different challenges, urban experiences, but based in Massachusetts, a state that has a different experience around COVID and around police violence than some others, and histories in those areas. And at BU, I think 23% of our students are international. So, you know, how do we think about this? How do we leverage this as we think about either your own journey for promotion? The other is I bring, that kind of intellectual background of looking at what's going on in terms of a stress coping model and the resources we have available to us, our own resources, the stressors we're experiencing, and how do we identify vulnerability, but also how do we look at resiliency and agency so that we're not using a deficit model as we're looking at our own faculty and their progress to promotion and tenure. So I'll stop at that point. I'm from New York originally, so I can talk really fast.
Thank you, Judith. Jenny, let's turn to you next.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jenny Jones, and I serve as the Dean and Professor at Clark Atlanta University, Whitney M. Young Junior School of Social Work. I am a proud alum of the school. I got my doctorate there in 2001. And our school is the oldest school of social work at an HBCU in the country, actually worldwide. And so I'm very, very proud to serve in this capacity. The school is located in Atlanta, Georgia. As many of you know, Atlanta, Georgia is the birthplace of the civil rights movement. Dr. Martin Luther King, who led us through that movement along with several others. Um, what I bring to this process is, and I'm going to try to make this really short. I echo what everyone else has said pretty much across the board, but I've had the experience in my academic career to work in several different types of universities, large state universities, um, private university, as well as now an HBCU. And the large state schools were PWIs. So I've worked across the spectrum, and I have seen the disparate treatment across the board and how things are done at each one of those universities. So, and the issues around the violence and COVID, and for myself, COVID had quite an impact on me in terms of anxiety. I was just almost paralyzed. I didn't know what to do. I'm a caregiver of a 90-year-old mama. And so I was obsessed with making sure that I protect my mother. I didn't want anything to happen to her. So I was really initially just really paralyzed by this virus until I was able to get my footing and get my bearings and kind of get a hold of myself and realize that, you know, I have to go on. I just can't stop. But it was very scary for me. And I think about myself, when I say that, I think about myself having the resources to be able to make sure myself is okay. But when I think about those folks who don't have those resources, who have to struggle through this alone, it's really, really challenging. I have one brother who has 2 sons and 2 grandsons. So I think about those young Black men and having to navigate the streets. It really frightens me when I think about what could happen to them. So I find myself saying to one of the grandkids who's a freshman, sophomore in college at my school, saying, I used to say, you know, if the police stops you, this is what you do. Now I don't really know what to say, because if the police stops you, even if you do what I said I told you to do, we don't know what could happen. So those are the kind of things that's really dear to my heart. And I hope through this conversation and through further conversation about this, that we're able to really kind of come up with some answers or some strategies. One thing about this meeting, this webinar today is, when I looked at the title, I noticed we talked about state violence. And so for me, in my head, it's not so much state violence, it's racial violence that have occurred across multiple states. Racial violence that have impacted a lot of African American and other brown people, and the attacks against Asians. I mean, all of that is that's racial violence. And I think for this profession, if we're going to move forward, truly move forward with this and do this in the way that we want to do it, that will be helpful, we got to start naming it and calling it what it is. That's the first step. So welcome everyone. I hope that you will enjoy this webinar this afternoon.
Thanks so much, Jenny. And Rogerio, please.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for inviting me. Hello to all the panelists. I am absolutely thrilled to be here with each and every one of you. I am a professor and the Associate Dean for Research and Innovation at the University of Michigan School of Social Work. And I'm also, interesting enough, I was, as I was hearing everyone else, I said, I should say that I am a member of the Senate in my university, where so many of those conversations are actually taking place. So it's my first year as a member of the Senate, and I have another 2 years to go. I think I can bring some of what's going on in those conversations to here as well. I was thinking about what you say, and the first thing that came to mind was the idea of tenure and promotion. Where does it come from, and how long has it been around? The answer is this is a 19th century system that we still use, and it hasn't changed very much in the whole century since this has been in place. And I do think that part of this conversation has to be about the roots of this system, which came to the United States in the beginning of the 20th century. So it's been around in the United States for more than a century now, and it has not changed very much at all from that time. And what we see from the system is from the very beginning, a separation of male and female at a time where we only talked about two genders, right? A system that was dominated by males and that in many ways had built into it many ways to exclude women from being a part of it. And whenever the women became a part of it, they created, exclusionary tactics so that the women would not continue as a part of it. And as I've been thinking about those things, I also thought, like, what does tenure and promotion mean in Brazil? What does it mean in the Caribbean? And it's not the same thing that it means in the United States. Tenure and promotion can take very different forms globally. And I think that, we would not be doing a good job if we didn't talk about how we do these things in the United States and how different they are, because there are other models out there. There could be sometimes better or worse, but I think we need to look at globally what it is that we are doing. And thinking about globalization and what COVID and all of the issues that my esteemed colleagues already talked about, COVID and racial violence, state violence, all of those things are not only in the United States. Those are global problems. Anti-Blackness, racism is a global problem that already existed, for example, in Brazil long before it existed in the United States. Brazil was, born, big, quotes, in 1500s. So 100 years before the United States, there was already, enslavement of African peoples happening in Brazil and in many places, what we call South America today. And so to me, COVID, it was weaponized. And to me, COVID is a form of state violence. COVID is today not what it could have been. It's being weaponized over and over again. There is, if COVID was treated as a virus, as it should have been from the very beginning, particularly in the United States, we would not have the number of people who died this past year. We would be in a very different space. And I think so. From the title of this, webinar, and the things that I would love for us to talk about, it was the COVID becoming a weapon against some people, as a weapon of the state that was then, one more way added to an arsenal of assaults that the state has perpetrated not only this past year, but has perpetrated for, centuries. So I'm ready for the discussion.
Thank you all. And I mean, as we can see, the range, I mean, we've already had before us through these comments, a range of perspectives, a range of experience, a range of different kinds of institutions that folks, panelists are currently working in and have in the past. So thank you so much. This has created a very rich starting point for us. Now, let's start with some questions. We have a question here about some of the university applicable forms of supporting particular early career faculty in the context. I'm going to use the current context to include COVID and state violence and so forth as an efficient way to talk about. So keep that in mind, but I'm also going to turn more to the recognition that faculty vary in terms of a number of factors that have complicated their ability to maintain teaching research accomplishments. As Dorian was talking about, there's caregiving, there's loss of family members, there's research forms such as community or system engaged that are just been less pivotable, less sustainable, many factors. So, given this, this has generated the idea of sort of a current context impact statements. for the work life during this period to provide some statement and encapsulation for the purposes of reviewers. So what should be included in one of these current context impact statements? Should we have them? And how or how or should these be evaluated? So please, perhaps we can start with anybody particularly ready?
I can
So
try.
Judith, yeah.
I can try and start. So are you asking specifically our views on impact statements?
Right. I mean, part of it is, should we use them? And if so, what should be in them and how should they be evaluated?
Right. So let me frame it first by saying at Boston University, in terms of going up for tenure or promotion, they one way to destigmatize the impact, people feeling seen as weak or deficient, is that all tenure clocks were extended by a year. And if you wanted to still go up on the regular system, you opted in, but it was not an opt-out system. And I think that was good, a good decision. Second, this year, in terms of when we submitted our annual reports, which I assume many universities had, there was an item on it to speak to how your work, teaching, or service may have been impacted by COVID this year, which I thought also was an excellent addition, so that it was made standard for everyone to respond to that. Specifically around one's packet of materials for COVID, for tenure and promotion. I think this is something that you need to think about strategically in terms of what happens at your school. So I think in many schools, and going up for tenure promotion, people produce teaching statements and research statements and perhaps service statements, but there are, reviewing for a number of schools now, tenure applications, I often see these included. And I think this is an opportunity for people to raise how they adapted, modified their curriculum, their teaching during this period, and to understand the initial investments they made in it. I think in terms of research, the ability to speak to how it may have shaped or reshaped your research agenda is important. And here's we get into the issue of people's research is very different. People doing secondary data analysis, some aspects of their research was not impacted. In my own research, I have a study with older adults in subsidized housing, urban subsidized housing, and the effects of COVID and social isolation. I have a study also looking at bias in affordable and inclusionary housing. And so touching on many of these issues and the ability to conduct the research. So I think, one can speak to it and you can demonstrate how creatively, innovatively you have refocused your work. But I also think it's important not just to think of the individual person taking this on. I see this as a responsibility of the department chair, and I don't know the levels. Every school has different levels you go through for review, but the school APT committee, if you have it, they have an important job in framing this. And this is no different than we frame things like when somebody's lab falls apart or somebody's community engagement project falls apart, that this is something we can help. We have a responsibility in supporting early career people to help support, deepen their narrative. I think, this is the important thing where you can control the narrative as the candidate going up, and your school can support your narrative. At BU, you go all the way up through a university tenure and promotion committee too. But I think this is something it's worthwhile for school faculties to have conversation about. Because I think there are active steps one can do. I'll just stop there, but
Thank
that's
you.
just some beginning
Thank you.
thoughts.
Yes, thank you. And Tenure, you?
I was just gonna say, I'd like to jump in there because Judith kind of captured most of this. When I received the questions, I kind of thought through them and thought about my role as dean and kind of how do I help my junior faculty be successful with this. So I thought the best way to try to pull some of that together was to actually I sent out a survey to the faculty with some of these questions just to get a sense from them around what impacted them. How did they do with this whole COVID process? What do they need to be successful? What will an impact statement look like? And Judith certainly captured much of what they said. First of all, let me just back up and say that my university sent out an email to all tenure earning faculty, early career faculty, stating that if you needed an extra year to prepare your dossier, that would certainly be granted to you. And so people had a choice to whether say, hey, I want another year, I feel good about going up now. But some of the things that my faculty, some of the things that my faculty said was around the impact statement. They thought it was a good idea, thought that it should really document the work that they have done and the work that they did prior to, it should take into consideration the work they did prior to COVID to show that people were being productive and moving along toward tenure, and the interruption of COVID certainly brought some of that to a standstill, as well as I think a couple of people said something around one statement may not capture everyone. It needs to be broad enough to capture the conditions for everyone, because some people were productive and some people were able to move on. But for those who were not, we should certainly have something in place to support them. So I think those are the kinds of things that we should look at. I was really quite pleased to see the results that I got back from the survey, because again, it helps me to think about as dean, now that as we move into at the end of the academic year, annual reviews are due, people are submitting those, to be able to think about that in a way that's going to lend itself to the things that we're talking about right now, and not take this really hardline approach that, you were not productive, so this means whatever. Rather, let's see how we can work this out so it doesn't impact you so negatively as you move on up the ladder.
Thank you. Yes, Rosario.
I just want to in some ways address some of the comments that are coming through the the Q&A because people seem to be very interested on the differences related to racial inequalities inside of academia. A lot of the things that we experience, and like all these newly renewed and incredible ways of adapting, and universities being so nice and giving extensions of a year here and there. I mean, all of those things is because it affected everybody inside of the university. If this was something that affected only one group, I don't think that we would have the same kind of response. All the difficulties that we see with COVID-19, I don't think that they are so surprising to people who do participatory research. For people who do research with very difficult populations to, in terms of numbers, right? These are not complicated things to understand by someone who does research with populations that are, marginalized in the society, where we live. So to me, the response of, oh, I think it's great that many universities, like, Jenny just talked about, may have given this opportunity. I have a lot of feelings about these things, like, I'm not sure. I can sincerely say to this, to a national audience, I am not sure that that's the best way to do this. It may work out at the end of the day. I think that there's always risk in any way we respond to those things. But I look at people who may be publishing papers out of secondary data. They could, if if you are someone who is, childless like I am, and I'm doing a lot of research that only requires me to be sitting in front of my computer, well, that then didn't affect me at all, right? So I think that this conversation in terms of how the university adapted cannot be separated from how individuals adapt. I think that by providing all these opportunities, in many ways, the institution is protecting itself much more than it is protecting the individual, right? I mean, as an institution, if you don't give an opportunity, well, then how are you going to be conceptualized and what's your reputation? But then it puts on the individual the great ability but difficulty to make a decision. Should I extend my tenure? What about if, right now I'm doing okay, but my mother may die in another 6 months, or I have someone who lives outside of the United States. So the difficulties of a global pandemic, we have not seen even the middle of it. We are living in a very privileged society that has vaccinated a lot of its population, right? Even though we had a disastrous beginning of the pandemic, the moment that we changed our leader, things actually changed. We now can get vaccination. Well, that's not true across the globe at all. So a lot of people, who are in the United States will keep being affected by this thing that we are calling COVID-19 much more in the future than perhaps they are being now. And I feel that the institutions are, having like this knee-jerk reaction and creating all kinds of, ways so that the institution is perceived as doing something, which is doing something. But I think we need to be a lot more longitudinal as to how we think about the impact of COVID-19 and the horrific impact of state violence, which has been present for everybody who's a person of color and women who have been in academia. And we have not created any, different conditions for those individuals who had may have had the same difficulties that we now see shared by everyone, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so I would love to hear my colleagues as well.
Thank you, Rogeria. Henrika, did you have a comment to share?
I did. So I want to, first acknowledge, we've talked about, I think it's a wide conversation about the financial impact, right, that you may have by delaying going up. So I think, we all know that, and that's, of course, a big concern. But I think the other thing we have to consider when we think about COVID statements, et cetera, is the emotional and psychological toll of that. Already, oftentimes, people of color, I'll speak for myself as someone Black who lives in a Black neighborhood and lives in a city that I'm highly invested in, the work that we do has a personal component to it. And so I think we have to consider what we are asking people to do when we ask them to explain why their work was stalled because of COVID or something else, and the vulnerability we're expecting them to put forth, and how that's just not fair. And to be honest, it doesn't really work in a system that really has not always been supportive of your friend or validated the work that you do. We know that often as people of color, our work is invalidated. I mean, we can see across the board, NIH publishes studies all the time about how Black people are least likely to get funded for their research. Those experiences don't disappear within the academy and don't disappear within our own colleges and universities. And so we are offering people the chance to discuss how COVID impacted or your inability to do your work, et cetera. We are not acknowledging how everything else in the world, like seeing Black people get murdered on TV every day, impacts your ability to do your work. And then we're saying to people, write this down and tell us how you felt and why this made you not do so great. Well, quite frankly, I don't intend to do that. And I don't think I should have to do that. It should be pretty obvious. But we also know that when we don't do that, people then take that as license to ignore what is right in front of us. And so I think, a COVID statement may be a great start, but we really need to think more seriously about what is it that we're asking people to do? What do we expect them to be able to do realistically? And how do we respond to that? It's not playing the race card. It's reflecting on what we have to live with every single day. And how do we move forward? And how do we expect people to move forward? So I think if we don't ever get to have that conversation, the fact is we'll continue to see the same disparity and disproportionality in terms of who gets promoted, who gets tenure, who becomes a full professor and endowed chair, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll stop there.
Great additions. Yes, Tamara, please.
I just wanted to add just a couple of points that Henrika actually covered. As I've been listening to my colleagues talk, I keep thinking about this idea that there should be and could be if folks were, and these are not individuals, because I saw the chat comment that says, why is it on the candidate? I mean, certainly we have to make ourselves look good, but why can't there be, if we're going to do this impact statement, why can't there be different kinds of impact statements? Like it doesn't, there's this sort of traditional way that we have to do the impact statement. And I think we've learned, I hope we've learned that COVID has just turned everything upside down. And what I hope, back to Judith's point around, because of the intersectionality between all of this racial violence in COVID, like there has to be a different kind of impact statement or part of that statement that doesn't say, woe is me necessarily, but I am creative, I am adaptive, I adapted my teaching to do, we all had to go online. We all weren't online. That wasn't easy. That we lost students, we gained students, students hated us. Like that was huge for a ton of us. And then even if, I question this idea of productivity, my research stalled. In whose language is that? Because you're nodding your head, whose language is that? It is, and I'm not suggesting, and this is not necessarily at the individual level. I think we do have to put our best foot forward, but I also think that, I do want the folks that are in positions of power at the dean level and the university P&T level to think about what else needs to go into this traditional packet. How do we make it less traditional so that we can sort of really deal with some of these disparities in the way that we're seeing them right now. And then the only other thing that I'll just say is, let's take it, Rogerio, you said, it's to the university's benefit. I'm like, so let's take advantage of the fact that today, this year, they're deciding to do something. And I do worry, I saw the comment about sort of when you extend the tenure tracks, what does that do in terms of sort of other disparities in wealth, because you don't get the promotions and the raises that go with that. And that is that's a valid concern. And how do we, how do we as candidates, how do you all that are out there as candidates sort of say, well, how do I take advantage of this system? Because they've certainly taken advantage of us.
Excellent points. Jenny, it looks like you have a...
Very quickly, when I think about, I agree with all of you. When I think about the impact statement and the way that Henrika articulated, I cannot disagree. However, for me, having been tenured at majority schools, my whole freaking dossier was an impact statement. I had to prove who I was, what I had done, and in relationship to the guidelines that had been given to me. So I think having an opportunity to tell your story the way you see it is certainly more beneficial to you in the long run than letting somebody else assume what your story means. Because I mean, I've just heard these nightmares, and I do review. I just reviewed for someone that was going for full a couple of weeks ago. I hear these nightmares that people have around tenure, particularly people of color at white institutions. It's not easy. And so if I have an opportunity to document my story myself, I feel better about telling it versus having somebody else make up what they think it might be. Because I've documented it, I have support to show what I've said. So if anything goes wrong, I have what I need to move to the next level.
Rogerio, let's take you, and then let's go to Dorian for some of the participant input. Yes, please.
I think that Judith had her hand up. I mean, I just want to respond to Jenny.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Is that okay, Judy, that
But go ahead, Rogerio.
I just want to bring out the fact, which I think is important for us to consider when we are giving the answers. And Jenny sort of inspired me to say this. I'm all for telling one's story. I am a storyteller. But here's the thing. In the system that we have, the story that we tell is discussed confidentially. It's not a public story. And to me, that is an enormous problem, because every single promotion and tenure decision is made under this confidentiality clause, which only benefits the institution. It does not really, most of the time, benefit the candidates that are going up for promotion and tenure. So to me, the exercise of telling the story is great, but you don't know who you're telling the story to most of the time. And you don't know how people are reacting to your stories because you never see the letters that come back to you. Only the people who are making the decision for you know how the story is being perceived. And we know that because the stories are perceived with tremendous distortion, and that's why so many people, in the Q&A are talking about all the tenure promotions, all the denials. It is because those things can be done in ways that are so secretive that nobody really has to prove why it is, right? But what's being suggested here is that we prove that we had the difficulties, that we show clearly what it is, that happened in our lives. But sometimes, isn't this, any different from what has happened before? The problem is how these things are interpreted and who interprets those things and what's made out of those things under this confidentiality situation where in other countries, for example, your examination for promotion is public. Everybody knows what it is you say. Everybody sees you giving a class, right? So it is public, and there's 40 people watching you defending, your dissertation. That 40 people watching you passing or not passing your exam to be promoted inside of a department. And so I really think that what I'm trying to do here more than anything is not to question what my colleagues are saying, but it's only to make all of us think about that we have a system that is stacked up to such a degree that, in my mind, if we are not very smart about how to use this niceness that's coming along this time, we may create even more difficulties in the future, because I don't trust a system that only responds when it's convenient to the majority. This is not a response because, Black people are having difficulties in academia, because queer people are having difficulties in academia. It's being responded in this particular way as we respond to disasters, how we respond to all kinds of things based on who it affects. As a gay man, a queer man, gender nonconforming person who lived through the AIDS epidemic, nothing was done in my benefit. It only became important when other people, began to have HIV. So the responses that we have, regardless of what they are only good and address truly some important issues when they affect the majority. And so that's why maybe I am being overly suspicious, but I'm inviting my colleagues to help me not be so suspicious. I want to be, a lot more, hopeful, and I am hopeful, but I want to be realistic about what I see in front of me.
Yeah.
Sorry, Judy, I went on more than I should.
Judy.
That's
please.
okay. I love your passion. I want to just comment on a few things. One, I think we have to be very careful with our words and jargon. And this is coming from somebody who works in the field of aging, productive aging, unproductive aging, I really struggle that we be careful about how we use those words. I would also argue that I think you have to be strategic. Each of you has to, who are going up, needs to understand your department, your school, your university, to know the risks of exposure and what you choose to share. I'm not naive about that, and I think Rogerio makes that point well. On the other hand, I do believe that I would say one would weave, if appropriate and important, the information about how external events, whether it's COVID, whether it's violence in your community, how that is entering your teaching, what you may be bringing new into the classroom, what you may be doing differently in your research and how you approach it. I believe the CV exists, but I do think that, Maya Angelou said it, it's your story. You control your story. And I believe that, The letters go to for external reviews are extremely important. Again, you need to know your institution. Are they supportive in getting leaders who work and understand you, the type of research you do and the areas in which you're doing work? The other is, and I would push the institution here, Rogerio, we need to think about inclusive excellence, how we define excellence. And I raise this because I think in this year, like many other years, faculty of color, gay faculty, etc., they carry extra responsibilities at times, both with student bodies, both in the community, both around public science. I have seen in the last few months Asian American, Asian, and Pacific Islander faculty in my school being drawn into public science, public speech, community engagement. And if your university values that, you know, you need to understand, is that going to be valued? How do you balance this as you shape your career to think about what you do so you feel authentic to yourself and your work, and what and how do you leverage what you do so it is valued by your institution? And so I don't want to say at the end of this webinar, we've said do A, B, C, or D. I think we're suggesting different possibilities. And I think what I would always say to early career people, find important mentors, some in your department, some outside your department, where you can discuss these things and think through what are the pros and cons? What are the upsides or downsides to doing these things? I mean, that I get you know, the vulnerability you feel as a tenure track faculty member. And I think, how do we support you in the process? And maybe SWR can have a role in that. I don't know if there's a, you know, a way to help mentoring around putting together one's tenure package from, you know, for people, but I'll stop there.
Thank you, Judith. Dorian, could I turn to you, because I know there's a rich set of comments.
Yes, we have some really good comments going in the Q&A. So I'm just going to raise a couple comments, and then I have a bolus of questions. The two comments that I want to raise are that a couple of folks have been pointing out that maybe this is an opportunity for us to think about how we can decolonize the tenure and promotion process, and think about less traditional means of demonstrating impact that many of our academies have historically embraced, like H indices and, you know, publications and external funding, that there are other methods of demonstrating impact that are really important. And then somebody else raised the fact that they were recently asked to do an external eval, and they were specifically told to keep in mind the impact that COVID could have had on the candidate, but the candidate was not asked to explain that, and that they appreciated that immensely. But I want to get to two questions that I think they came in very early, and I think they're really important. And I think they've been on the minds of a lot of the folks in this panel and our participants. In light of the fact that Nicole Hannah-Jones did not get tenure at UNC, what advice would you give pre-tenure Black women in academia who are often othered in their institutions or viewed as angry or vilified, especially those who study Black populations? And then, as a piggyback to that question, somebody else raised another high-profile case at UVA that happened over the summer, where a Black scholar was denied tenure and then petitioned, was granted tenure, and wound up leaving the university over it. But that they noted that an associate professor of poli-sci at an HBCU had said that a Black scholar has a better chance of becoming an astronaut than they do gaining tenure in this country. And do you all agree with that statement? So if you could tackle that, I know it's a big one, but how can our academies address the anti-Black sentiment that seems to have been pervasive for the entire duration of the academy, and really is coming to a head right now.
So I'll take a stab and go first. You know, I obviously don't know the person's area of work that who asked the question, but I will say, for example, in my work, which focuses predominantly on African Americans, and I said young boys and emerging adults, I try to channel my anger into how I do my work, the work that I choose, how I talk about it, my discussion sections. Those are the places that I challenge the narrative that we have out there, because I recognize that the academy is a social environment, whether we want to admit it or not. And as much as we would like to think that our work speaks for itself alone, we are asking to be brought into a community of people who have to decide if they want to live with us for the rest of their lives. And you have to be honest about that. And the fact is, people don't want to be around someone that they think is wholly angry. And that doesn't mean that you can't be angry, but it does mean you have to be smart about how you challenge that anger and how you engage with people. I've been on panels before with people who don't have tenure, who are not in social work, who say tenure doesn't matter to me. Well, it mattered to me. It mattered to me for a whole lot of reasons. It mattered to me because A, I like job security. B, it mattered to me because it meant I would have a voice that other people don't have to share and elevate the narratives that other people can't elevate. And if I didn't have tenure, I wouldn't have the chance to do that. So I think it's important that we see not just the trees in front of us, but we see the forest. We understand the big picture. And if you take yourself out of the equation too early, you won't have that opportunity. So I believe in playing the long game. The long game for me was get tenure, keep it, and then do what I want to do and challenge somebody to tell me that I couldn't do it. Now, that's not for everyone, but that is how I live life. I think that has worked well for me. That's the game I continue to play. I don't think there's pretty much, most colleagues couldn't say that I'm collegial enough, but they also know where I'm coming from. They also know that I feel very firmly about who I am as a Black woman, what I think about the world, that racism exists, Black Lives Matter, and anything else that you want to tag on to that. But I can only say that because I have the position that I have. Do I think I sold out? Absolutely not. Nor would I ever, because that's against the moral fiber of who I am. But I did have to be smart about how I chose to express my anger. And mine has been in making sure that the topics that I challenge the racist narrative of this country. The way that I talk about it challenges the racist narrative of this country, but that I have given myself an opportunity to do that. So my advice to the person would be, and to anyone else, think about how you can take your anger and challenge in a way that is productive, not just for you, but for the work that you're trying to have heard and have printed and have elevated, because your work is not just about you, it's about your participants. It's about their stories, what needs to change. I think sometimes we get so caught up in what we want to say, we forget that we're supposed to be doing this, at least for me, to elevate my community. And if I am not in the position to do that, what good have I provided? What have I shared? What have I done? I've, in my opinion, done very little. So I think about a good way to challenge that anger, get the work that you want out, get the position that you want, and move it forward in a way that's productive, but that does not stifle you.
But isn't that what Nicole did, Henrika?
Isn't what we call what?
Isn't that what Nicole did by creating a project that basically woke up the entire country?
Yeah.
And it didn't end up really well.
Well,
I'm sorry for interrupting everyone. I mean, because it goes back a little bit to what Judith was saying. I mean, there is a meritocracy idea here that I'm not sure is applicable to everyone. I'm not sure that what makes people get tenure and promotion has anything to do with merit.
I'm going to disagree with that, because I'm at a university where people don't get tenure. So I'm not going to agree with that. That may be from one place to another, but I'm very clear that where I am, I earned every bit of tenure. And the people that didn't get it didn't earn it. So I'm not going to say that there's a universal lack of meritocracy. I will say that personal things can get in the way, but if you don't do the work and you want to then have tenure, that won't happen. Now, in some places, of course, doing the work may not be enough. And that is the issue we have to deal with. But there are places, if you don't do the work and people expect to get tenure, that won't happen.
Yeah,
I'm clear my meritocracy helped me to get tenure.
I think
Tamara, go ahead. And then
No, go ahead, Jenny. Go ahead, Jenny.
Oh,
Okay.
I'm sorry. Did I cut you off?
No, I'll go
Oh,
after you. Go ahead.
I think, I mean, I understand both sides, and I want to go back to something that Judith said, and this is something that everyone may not agree with. I don't think anybody can tell my story better than me.
Right.
And when I went up for tenure, I told my story, and some folks didn't like my story, but they couldn't deny the work that I had done. And so I agree with part of what Henrika is saying as well as Judith. I think you got to do the work, and we all know the world isn't fair, Rogerio. Of course, you're not going to be seen as shining armor, having done everything that's right. But if you tell the story and have the work to support the story, a lot of schools don't want the type of legal battles around tenure. So if you've done the work and you tell the story the way it should be, I mean, it doesn't mean it's going to always come out right. It may not come out in your favor. I'm not going to say not right. It won't come out in your favor, but you have a recourse. Now, I'm just going to be honest with you guys. I told you I was at 2 large state PWIs. I chose to go to an HBCU because I got tired of some of the fights that you're talking about right now. I got tired of my work being valued. I got tired of not being good enough. I got tired of no matter how good I am, I got to do some more. And I got tired of not having very many people around me that look like me. So I made a choice to move on to a university where people look like me. That means it's easy now. I don't think because I'm at an HBCU, everything is easy and they just give me a free pass. That's not how it works. I have to work for everything I get. But I'm with people that look like me, that understand my story, understand my fight, because most of them have had that same fight somewhere. And this is for a larger discussion because it's come up in some of the dean's meetings around how do we recruit Black faculty and hang on to them? How do we recruit Black students? But these very same things that we're talking about right now, that's the problem. We got to think about that, and we got to be real clear about that, and do what we say we're gonna do, and live with that. When we talk about Hannah Nicole Jones, we all know why. We all have our own opinion about why she did not get tenure. But to Henrika's point, she did not come up through the academy documenting that work. She did her work outside of the academy. It's still wonderful work. It is stellar, but it didn't come through those academic rigor that we deem in the academy as the way to go. Does that mean she should have been turned down? No, but I'm saying that was part of that was something that UNC could hide behind and not give tenure. So it's a chess game, Rogerio. It's a chess game. You got to study it and you got to be clear about it. And before you make every move, you got to be sure what that move is going to bring to you.
I'm really appreciating the range of, I'm so sorry, just perspectives. And so I didn't mean to interrupt you. Please go ahead, Tamara.
I was just going to say, I was going to start with it is to Henrika's point in incorporating some of Judith's comments and certainly to Jenny's points, it is a game. Make no mistake. And is it a fair game? No. Is it a fun game? No. Is it an exhausting game? Absolutely, it's exhausting. And yet, you know, I will sort of say this, it reminds me of sort of when I was joining a sorority. I had to do some hoops that I could have been like, are you kidding me? But I wanted to be part of this sorority. And so I jumped the hoops and I was strategic about who I chose to do different things with. And I think it's the same idea. I think, you know, to Henrika's point, you know, there are ways and they don't always feel good. When I get angry, it comes out in my discussions all the time. But it also, you know, I remember sitting with a bunch of students of color at the MSW level when they were complaining about something awful about professors, about everything. And I said, get your degree, because that's when you actually have some power. You have some power now as a student, but you have more power when you have a degree. And that group of students have gotten their degree and they are coming back and they are challenging lots of different things. And the other thing that I'll just say around sort of, you know, one of the things that I did really that sort of helped is I started to think about who were the folks that resembled me in terms of context, in terms of color, in terms of gender, in terms of all that stuff, who got tenure. And I started to form what I call the TAMI team. And the TAMI team is not just sort of the associate professors when I was assistant professor. Those are the folks that, like one person in particular, I was just emotionally distraught. And she was my emotional person as I walked the circle of the shopping center, sobbing about whatever was going on. That was her role for me at that time. She has shifted to a different role. I have somebody else who was like, okay, this is how you do it. This is how you do it. This is how you do it. And I'm super appreciative of him in my life at, at that time. And so there's this team of people that are sort of in academia, outside of academia. And for me, some of those, it takes a village to raise a child as part of my motto. It takes a village to raise Tammy and get Tammy through tenure, and it will take a village that will get Tammy to full at some point. And I think trying to seek out those opportunities helps when you get to say, I remember when the election happened in 2016 and I was going in to teach class and I'm like, what am I going to say? Because I am a mess myself. I called my mother and she said, baby, you weren't born when we were getting hosed down in the streets. You weren't born. And she did my 20-minute civil rights history lesson. And she said, and yet we've come out, and not always good, but we have moved forward. And that's your message. You've got to give hope that you will get through this. It won't be easy, but don't do it alone.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Judy, did you have your hand up or no? And then after that, I'm going to go back to Dorian and see if there's anything we want to take from
Sure.
that box.
Sure. Just
Go
to
ahead.
say, I think all of us, universities are microcosms of the world. All of us, I think, here would affirm that there is incredible bias and discrimination based on race, based on age, based on gender, based on disability, on so many different types of other. But I do want to say two things. I think we need to see this as structural and the need to change it. And at the same time, you as an early career person are moving through this system. So one, I would say, universities are changing, but we can't just change the tenure process. We have to change the hiring process. We have to change the review process, and we have to get more women and persons of color in leadership positions within universities. So this is an enormous task. But in the meantime, and I want to build on what Tamara said, you need to have a strategy to understand what your strengths are and how to move your career forward. And I think the idea of having mentors and having a support network, everybody should have Tammy's group. We can trademark that or something. But I think it is those two things. You need people above you and you need people around you that are going to support you through this process, that can give you honest feedback, that can help you make these strategic decisions that will, as you balance. Going up for tenure is balancing so many things: the teaching, the research, the service. How do I make these decisions? Which ones are important? Which ones are authentic to me? How are they valued by the institution? These are all strategic decisions, and it helps to have those sounding boards and those support systems. At the same time, we collectively have to work to change a number of the structural inequities in the system so that people do not feel isolated and alone and unsupported and undervalued in their work.
Thank you. And Roshiri, let's take you and then we'll go to Dorian.
I just want to express my, a sense of discomfort that I'm having right now, because a lot of the conversation is being fabulous, and I so adore each and every one of my panelists. But I think that in some ways it goes back to the individual being capable of creating a network, the individual having merit, the individual having done the work, the individual having, being able to do so many things. And I think when we go back to that point over and over again, I feel that we are distancing ourselves from the structural issues that we have talked about until about 10 minutes ago. I don't know how to reconcile those two positions that we as a panel have. On the one hand, we seem to be talking about if you do the work, if you find the right people who will mentor you and all of those things, things will go well. But at the same time, I think, and I certainly said so, that there is a structure out there that no matter, what you do, it will be detrimental to certain groups of people. So I'm not saying that one is right and the other one is wrong, but I do think that we need to reconcile those positions, because I don't think it works to think of, the individual being capable and meritorious about certain things, while at the same time we are saying that there is a failed system from another century that, consistently oppresses certain individuals to the extent, I mean, I'm not even talking about like tenure and promotion. I mean, the oppression is on your day-to-day, how you teach, how you are evaluated, and so on and so forth. I would love to have us come to some kind of not agreement, but some kind of conversation that actually helps us hold those two positions at the same time, or abandon one of them if one believes that one is better than the other. I am uncomfortable with those two together.
Yeah, Rogeria, I think you're absolutely right. And I guess I'd been thinking about this a couple of days ago, in the same way that we talk about the micro, meso, and macro perspectives, and that we work with, clients and individuals. I think I know I've got this. There's three parts to this. There's the micro, sort of the individual sort of doing the work, but then, it's incumbent upon those that, whether we're in leadership, whether we're in leadership, whether we're tenured, to start pushing the structural piece, because we should not be putting that on the pre-tenure folks, because we all know that that's a really vulnerable position to be in. No matter what your university says, you're worried about doing that. And so for me, the conversation, we've sort of focused on sort of maybe the micro stuff, but earlier we were talking about the macro stuff. And so now it's really, how do we begin to blend those? So again, let's go back to what is the strategy, what is the comprehensive strategy? Because we know that historically this country does piecemeal stuff, whether it's in healthcare, we don't treat until they're dying. We're dying today, so this is the treatment. We're going to extend tenure clocks. When people have been dying all along, and that we could have done prevention. So really, how is it that if we've got sort of what I call the macro level, the institutional problem, this 19th century system, who is going to step up and begin to challenge that, while we then support folks at the early career levels who are trying to make it up, so that it doesn't become just an individual problem? Because that is the nature of who we are as a country. We're individualists, and we're suggesting that we need to be collectivists in some ways. I'm with you. I just don't, I think it's more than those of us sitting on this panel. It's more than the folks that are listening to us. I know we talked about earlier, we want the deans and the directors and like folks who can actually, the provosts, frankly, the folks that are sitting there, we've been talking about DEI in all of our places. And yet, is there a specific DEI focus that happens in university P&T committees? So that when we're, to get at sort of when we're looking at folks who don't have the right kind of research or the right kind of productivity, that they can say, oh, wait, this is different. Like, who does that job, and who can we challenge to do that job and push to do that job? So that we're hitting this at 3 or 4 different ways, so that we can see some progress, because we know we haven't.
It's a good, these are just really helping. We know this, but sharpen that we've got people who are here right now and at the individual level and are seeking some guidance. And at the same time, we don't want, it's like resilience means you're just adapting to unfair conditions. But so I just am really valuing the frankness and the richness of this kind of challenge that everyone is bringing forward. And Judith, were you wanting to add?
I was just going to say that I totally get this. We need structural change, and the question is, where does it happen? And in the university, it probably happens at every level. In the department, in the school, in the university. clearly, I think about it in terms of the strategic plans that, that we go through. And, you've been going through a strategic plan. And at the university level, one of the 5 areas was diversity, inclusion, and equity. And, I think how this gets incorporated into every school and department in terms of setting goals, objectives, and metrics to achieve it and to be held accountable to. I think about this in terms of, we think about teaching in terms of, tenure and promotion in terms of the 3-legged stool, teaching, research, service. What are the metrics by which we have inclusive excellence, by which we measure those things? What's the tool? So if you have tools, if you have accountability, if you have measures, if you have metrics, I'm for transparency and clarity. And because I look at it, I think, women, people of color, et cetera, have always been, excuse my language, screwed by the behind the scenes lack of clarity. So the more that we can make institutions at all levels begin to articulate that, and that the articulation of those metrics, of those goals and objectives have to be inclusive in the people developing them. Is it going to happen overnight? No, but I think many universities are on that path. I think at the same time, we struggle about people who are in a system that has not yet changed. And how do they build their career and have success, if we think of success as tenure. I would also say at Boston University now, with a medical campus as well, only 50% of the positions are tenured positions anymore. So I go back to Rogerio's point about where are we in terms of the evolution of tenure. And but at many universities, there are many people who are in non-tenure track positions who are also striving to gain in their careers. And I think oftentimes at schools of social work, there is a political divide that often isn't acknowledged between NTT, non-tenure track positions, whether they're called clinical or practice positions, and tenure track positions. And we've not talked about that today, but I see the tensions in those worlds, not just in social work, but in schools, other professional schools across the campus, which often is divided again by race and gender.
Thank you. And I'm aware that we are less than the last 15 minutes. So at this point, Dorian, let's have you bring forward some of the participants.
Thank you. I actually just want to draw attention that Rogerio, you have definitely struck a nerve with a number of our participants who are very grateful for you raising the systemic issues that are pervasive. We had a number of comments. One person said that as a Latina, she feels invisible in the academy, and that they appreciate also the idea of like who has the ability to go out and seek mentors and find people that will invest in them. And also about the way in which we hire people. Why are we hiring people that we do not believe we can tenure? But there is a very pragmatic question that I think is a good way to send us out after having been very macro in all of this. Somebody asked if there were any ideas about how to shape the selection and preparation and use of external reviewers in this process, because they are such a wild card. I know I just gave feedback to a colleague where I said that, listen, a lot of this is going to depend on which kind of reviewer you get and whether what their orientation is about what is most important. So do you all have any guidance based on our conversation about that specific piece of selecting, prepping, and using external reviewers?
I know.
Rogerio put his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Please go ahead. Sorry.
I don't think I have the perfect answer because unfortunately those things are not specified in any faculty book, right? So I think, Judith's hope of clarity and specificity and metrics, we are not going to find them in any faculty book that I have ever looked into, no matter what the school or the university is. They are opaque for a reason, right? There is no faculty book that has numbers, where you should be sending your research, where you should be going for your reviewers. There's a lot of fuzziness around those things for a reason. It is because, going back to the structure, it is a structure that has to be in place to maintain a particular type of structure, which is one that is uh, you know, maintained by the majority. In majority, I'm not going to define what it is. I mean, it depends on where you are globally. But so I think that, given that there is very little specificity in all of those faculty books, in response to, to Laurie, who asked the question, I think that the school has to be very clear about who they ask to review cases, and people do have ways of doing so by getting to know the people that they go back to for reviews, and the school has to be ready to dispute certain things that reviewer says, right? I mean, if a reviewer says A, it doesn't mean that, like, immediately the school now believes that A is the final word. I mean, a reviewer says A, but that, if you ask that same person 5 days later, maybe the answer is going to be a little different. So all I'm saying here is that there is no formula, but there is a level of flexibility that we have to use as to how we interpret what a reviewer says. And I think we need to encourage the school, not individuals, to help to create a pool of reviewers who understand what's happening in social work. I am asked to do those letters all the time, and they go to psychology, they go to social work, they go to sociology, nursing, I mean, whatever it is. And when they come from different disciplines to social work, sometimes they say things because they don't actually get what's happening inside of social work. And then sometimes conveniently, they are interpreted for exactly what it is that they say outside of the social work context. So I think that the school, the department, the university, they all should come together, not the individuals to choose, the perfect reviewers, but to come together and be careful and critical of how reviewers actually write those letters.
And Judith, you had your hand up?
Yeah,
Oh, Judith, you went back on mute.
I swore, so it's a good thing I was muted. So let me say a little bit about how we approach it at Boston University, is that the tenured faculty in the School of Social Work have the responsibility for identifying external reviewers. And what we begin with is the copy of the person's CV, so that we begin to understand, and again, we have their research statement as well. What they're doing, where they're publishing, the type of methodology, all these things go into the fact, influence who we identify as external reviewers. Speaking to one of the points that Rogerio raised, is that many social workers work interdisciplinarily and publish in non-social work journals. So that we have to make sure, with somebody whose work is very much tied to psychology, that we don't necessarily all have social work reviewers. We want to find people who know their work, can speak to the work. You're looking for people who really can engage with it. And I think that's, I think we're clear as to how we identify external reviewers. Many schools, when I review for them, send me their tenure promotion criteria. And in fact, Paul, I'm thinking of you, Deb, you say, please review our candidate based on UW standards, not your own institution. So I think there's ways that institutions can begin to respond to this. I think in social work, because we have people working in such diverse fields and different types of methodology, we really need to be sensitive to who we get to review the work. I don't think there's a magic number like X number of articles and things like that. I can look in economics. I know there's 5 big journals. You have to publish in one of the big 5. It takes 3 years for a journal article to be accepted there. I mean, other fields are clearer. They have these more narrow criteria. Social work is not like that. But I think in terms of external reviewers, social work departments and schools should have clarity to their faculty at large as to what is the process by which we identify and generate external reviewers. At Boston University, all schools use the same, I think it's 7 questions in sending out letters. But there's wide variation based on discipline as to how those questions are answered. We make available to the candidates what that letter looks like. So I think there's ways, it's not a perfect world, but I think there's ways to bring greater clarity to what the process is around the choice of external reviewers.
Thank you. We're very close to the end of our time. Any panelists would like to make some closing comments, particularly that haven't on this last topic?
I'll just say one very quick thing. I mean, and I agree with everything that Judith says, but all the letters that I get at the end has a paragraph, a question that says, would this person be promoted or tenured in your institution? So again, it is structurally defined in a way that is absolutely wrong. It says, use the criteria from my school, but would you promote? So it's to me, it doesn't make any sense, right? So it's going back to the idea, I mean, that it actually works that way. It's in the same letter, you have 2 positions. One is do the thing based on what our criteria are, and at the end it asks, would you do this in your institution? Which the criteria may be a little different. To me, that's completely bull. You know what the rest.
Roger, you took the words right out of my mouth. As you know, I've sat on our P&T committee for a couple of years now, and like we say, this is how Simmons is, this is da 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 da, and then like, would you get tenure at your institution? And some of these institutions don't look like Simmons, and so like, what do you do with that? You know, and so that again is for me a more macro level thing that has not necessarily anything to do with the candidate. You know, all candidates can do is like get to know as many people as they can without collaborating. You know the rules, you can't write with them, you can't do this, you can't do that, you know, but can you not do all of that and know that somebody could possibly get selected because they match your interest, and all of that stuff. So
can I just say that it's been an overwhelming year, and anybody who's at this webinar, I don't want anyone to leave feeling alone or totally overwhelmed. And so, you know, if you have people in your own network to reach out to get support, you know, I really would advise you to do so. And if you don't, you know, can you let us know, and that we can maybe be helpful in hooking you into people who could be supportive.
Yeah, and I just want to say that thank you, Judith, for saying that. I was thinking the same thing. This has been a very robust conversation, and I am very, very honored to have been a part of this group of my wonderful scholar friends. I guess my takeaway for this is, of course, we've got a lot of work still to be done, that's for sure. But, and B, I think we touched on some very important, salient issues that's impacting all of us across academia in this country, regardless of the type of school that you're at. These are all issues that I think are cross-cutting, and we just need to think about that. I don't think there are any easy answers for this. I I guess for myself, my takeaway is that when I'm looking at reviewing a dossier from someone from another school, to think about some of the things that we said here today, and try and be as honest and open as I possibly can in my review. And that question that always comes up, you know, will that person get tenured at your school? I'm gonna start thinking about that a little different. I may not even answer. I don't know what I'm gonna do, but I'm just gonna think about it differently, because it is something to consider. It's a, you know, it's kind of a it's a hard place to be. And so and I wanted to say to Henrika, I mean, your comments were so well stated, and I understand being in a school where you've got to, you know, you're doing the work around African Americans. That's what your interest, that's where your interests lie. And you don't want to have to re-explain that or explain why you're doing that, but it needs to be honored. And so I think that was a really important point. And I think we should all think about that. And several people kept referencing the dean. You know, deans have some teeny weeny bit of power. We don't make it rain. But we do have an opportunity to impact some of this. So I will certainly take this to heart and keep it in the forefront as we navigate some of these issues at my school.
Thank you. And we are just about at our time, but in this case, Henrika, you get the last word.
Well, I don't know if we want that. No. You know, I just want to say, you know, our university is different. We don't, as someone going up for tenure, you have no impact on who's selected, who you don't know who wrote the letter. You'll never know. You can't make suggestions, etc. And so I think the model that we've had to use at our school is you find an ally. And I think that's important across all of our environments because the process is different. So if it's not an ally in your college, someone in your university, someone outside, ideally someone who knows the process where you are, who can help you navigate those really choppy waters. Because when you don't know who the person is, you walk around SWR or CSWB wondering, did you write my letter? Did you write my letter? And you don't know, right? So you need someone who at least can help you understand what the expectations are. We have a very long 1.5-year process for tenure of your first materials go out in March and you don't find out until the next September if you got tenure. So that's a long time to wait and a long time to worry. And so I think, you know, try to find someone who is, you know, who has done the process, ideally at university, but if not somewhere else, who can help you, because your work may be controversial or it may not be, but maybe you're the controversy and you want someone to help you understand how to deal with that, because the process alone is scary. It's just slightly less scary when you're not alone, but you want to find someone that can be supportive of that. So I'm going to end on that note.
We are at the end of our time. Let me just again say thank you to the panelists. What an extraordinary conversation, with depth, with candor, and concluding here in terms of really trying to kind of reach out to folks who are in the near future going to be walking these steps. This recording will be available on the SWR RCDC webinar series site. And so colleagues who haven't been able to see it, let them know. And again, thanks to all, really earnest thanks. And keep in mind, if you go back to this, I'm almost certain that this has also kept some of the question and answer and chat components so that you could review that, because many contributors raise very important points as well. So thank you all. And with this, we'll say goodbye. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, y'all. Thank you so much.